Hope everyone's week is off to a great start. You are watching the Cubs Baseball Channel with Chuck Walter and Mick Gillespie. If you want Chicago Cubs content around the clock, nonstop, Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday included, every day that ends with a Y, just hit the subscribe button. We'll get our unpaid interns on some of the graphics, and we'll go from there, Mick. First things first, Cody Bellinger is not going unpaid. This man is going to make a lot of money. We are talking best baseball player on the planet right now. Forget just in the friendly confines of the Ivy. Since June 27th, Bellinger leads the majors in batting in his last 10 games. Bellinger, a .436 average, an OPS that looks like Barry Bonds above 1.324, 15 RBIs, 5 home runs, 28 years of age. You're talking about a player that could be the cornerstone for the next 4, 5 years, 8 years if you extend him. And that brings up the big question: what message would this send to Cubs fans if they let Cody Bellinger walk?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag right now. I mean, no one can argue with the results. I mean, he's hitting .319, and he's got 14 home runs and 44 knocked in the games that he's played, and including beating up on the Cardinals, which all of us loved. But the question is, can the Cubs win now? And that answer is probably not this year. I mean, even though he's been great. So should they extend him? That was something that we heard the Cubs talk about at the beginning of the year. And if I'm Bellinger, I'm not signing anything. I mean, look at the way that things went for him in L.A. He was the face of the franchise. He was an MVP. He's one of the best players in baseball. And then all of a sudden he fell off, and, you know, he had to sign a one-year deal with the Cubs, which I thought was the best signing that Jed Hoyer and company made in the offseason, and it has really paid out that way. So if I'm Bellinger, I feel like I've got all of the momentum in my corner. And so, you know, I'm sure his agent's like, hey, let's wait, man. We're going to make a killing in the offseason and free agency. So that kind of swings back to what the Cubs do right now. And with the deadline approaching, and they're, 6.5 back, and they're trailing two teams that are clearly better than them in a division that isn't great. You've got all of this young talent pushing to the top. I think that the answer is to trade Bellinger, and then the question is, what do you get for him, and where does he go?
There are a lot of teams that are courting him right now, potentially. The San Francisco Giants seem like a likely candidacy with some of the projects that they have and the young players that they have in the outfield, and just guys like Yastrzemski and Austin Slater and no really proven outfielders that can give you that pop in the lineup. Bellinger would absolutely help out. You've seen what a former Dodger and Jock Peterson has done in San Francisco, pretty much, I wouldn't say reviving his career, but picked up where he left off after Chicago. Some of the suitors, the Astros, Rangers, Yankees, Giants, as I mentioned, Phillies, Red Sox. With that being said, what does Cody Bellinger right now, who's a free agent after this season, so no team control for whoever gets him, he's what we call a rental, a pure rental in the finest form. What do you get for a guy like Bellinger? Do you get a top prospect?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can really name your price. You talked about the Giants, and wouldn't that be interesting? Go from the Dodgers, the face of the Dodgers, to the Giants. I mean, you're talking about, old school Leo DeRozier type stuff here, like could that happen? Yeah, I mean, it certainly could. I'm keeping an eye on the Phillies. You saw they moved Bryce Harper from the outfield to first base. Bellinger's an outfielder. They need some more pop in their lineup, because they feel like, having made it to the World Series last year, that they can win it all, even though, everyone's chasing the Braves, who have just a great team. Anything can happen in the postseason, and the Phillies proved that last year. So I keep an eye on them. The Yankees are in last place in the AL East, but the AL East is a monster. I mean, Baltimore, unbelievably, took their time. They have generated all of these prospects. They're ahead of Tampa Bay all of a sudden, who's, got 60-plus wins. And then the Blue Jays have this young talent, and then the Red Sox are ahead. But the Yankees still think they can win now. So I'm looking at the Yankees. They've always been big buyers. Bellinger would certainly fit what the Yankees are trying to do, and that's win now, because if they don't win, then Brian Cashman and his entire front office could be in a lot of trouble. So I see them wanting to win. I would have said the Mets, but they're just kind of sailing in the other direction. I expect them to be sellers. But you ask me now, what can the Cubs get? Look at the deals that the Cubs made when they traded away the core of the 2016 team and then some of the other great players that they've traded since then, right? They've gotten unbelievable prospects. Top of the list to me is Kevin Alcantara. They got from the Yankees for Rizzo. He's a top 20 MLB prospect overall. He's been amazing, and he's up and coming. They got Pete Crow Armstrong. I call him Hollywood Pete. They got him from the Mets for Javi Baez. He's another top 20 prospect. The guy is a running highlight reel, and he's going to be fun to watch. But those are the type of players that you want. They got Owen Casey from the Padres for Yu Darvish. The guy was 20 and leading Double-A Southern League in home runs and RBIs earlier this year. So he's still learning, but a big power guy, corner outfielder, and a superstar in the making. So there are guys that are going to be available for these teams, because if you're going to get Bellinger, who to me is one of the best players that you could possibly get right now to help your team win, you're going to have to give up prospects. So I'm expecting that the Cubs are going to get a top-end prospect. The question is, how old is this prospect? When they made the Yu Darvish deal, they had to get a really young Owen Casey. He was like 18 or 17 years old. I mean, like a really young guy. And now he's finally, 21 in Double-A, but it's taken a few years. I mean, think about that trade being made. Pete Crow Armstrong was in the lower levels of the minor leagues. Now he's in Double-A. The Baez trade was a couple of years ago. Teams don't like to trade like the almost big league ready prospects anymore, just because the front offices don't want to be there when the guy emerges as a great player.
Yeah, well, let's throw San Francisco into the mix, just because having worked at the CBS affiliate in San Francisco, I'm very familiar with some of their prospects. Kyle Harrison is their top prospect, left-handed pitcher from the Bay Area. I would say there's a 0% chance that Bellinger could return him, just because he's ready to go. He's going to be in San Francisco any second. What about like Luis Matos, who's already patrolling the outfield in San Francisco, looks to be pretty good? Is that something that if the Cubs did a clean swap there, you'd be happy, or would you say we just got fleeced for Bellinger?
No, I mean, look, you could go get a guy who's young and is already in the big leagues, and that happens a lot. It just depends on what the position of need is that the Cubs are targeting. If I'm the Cubs, I'm going catching first. I want a star catcher. I want a real bona fide star catching prospect, a Shea Langoliers type. I saw him a couple years ago. The Braves traded him in the Matt Olson deal.
Let me chime in,
That's
Mick.
the kind of guy.
Let me chime in, because the Giants do have two prospects. They had their former number one prospect, Joey Bart, who hasn't even played this year pretty much because Patrick Bailey's taken the reins. Would you do a package deal to wind you back Joey Bart, or have you seen enough of him that he just can't be consistent at the major league level?
Well, look, a lot of young guys aren't consistent at the major league level, but if you have good stuff, eventually you figure it out. I mean, think about all of the great pitchers. Nolan Ryan didn't come in and, dominate like he did forever. I mean, you saw flashes of greatness when, he was on that 69 Mets team. And then it took a long time for him to kind of become the pitcher that he was. Randy Johnson was traded by Montreal, right? Wasn't it Montreal? And he was just like this hard-throwing, wild lefty, and both of those guys ended up in the Hall of Fame. So that happens. You target these guys, you watch them. If you have a good scouting department, they've been watching the development. And what the Cubs try to do, you think about the Jake Arrieta trade. Here's a first-round pick. Baltimore had him. They couldn't figure out what to do with him. He had this cross-body delivery. And the Cubs got him, and they threw him in the pitch lab that they have, and or whatever they wanted, whatever they called it back then, and got him to become maybe one of the Cubs' greatest, one of the Cubs' greatest pitchers of all time. He led them to a World Series. He was the NL Cy Young Award winner. But he was a player that was with Baltimore and wasn't going anywhere fast, and the Cubs made a trade and turned him into a winner. So that happens all the time.
Can I give you something you're not going to like at all, Mick? You're gonna have a big scowl on your face when I tell you this one. I know that Scott Boras is going to want to test the open market. I think the Cubs should throw him the bag. They should give him an offer right now, and I'm talking Cody Bellinger, that Bellinger cannot refuse. I think he wants to be in Chicago. Don't even let him test the market. Give him the blank check and say, Bellinger, you're our star of the future. Because I think Chicago has their star in-house right now, a building block that you have for the next 5-6 years if you can lock him up through his mid-30s. And I don't see why you'd let him hit free agency. I don't see why you'd let him hit free agency, A, and B, the prospect that you're getting in return, I don't think it's going to be Cody Bellinger. I think that Chicago would be making a grave mistake if they don't at least try to go out and throw this guy the bag, because he's a superstar.
Yeah, look, he is a superstar, and they got exactly what you hoped for in the deal when they signed him in the offseason. And like I said from the beginning, some of these signings, Mancini, loved the story. He's a good player, but this team was never going to contend in my mind, and he's a player that should have gone to a contender. And, hey, I can kind of fill in spots, and I'm a good pinch hitter and all that stuff. But I would have rather had those at-bats and that experience going to some of the young players like Nelson Velasquez instead of getting his at-bats in AAA. He should be getting those in the big leagues because, long term, he's going to help you a lot more learning how to hit big league pitching than snacking on the AAA guys. Obviously Eric Hosmer, I just never got that trade or that signing either. And he's since been released. But again, you're wasting time that you could be spending getting guys ready to help you in the big leagues with players that aren't really fit for what the Cubs are. And I feel like the Cubs wanted to be something that they weren't, and that's a contender. This team was never a contender, but they want to be one. And I think that when you looked at what they did in 2016, you build into a contender within your system and go out instead of going out and getting the Miles Mastrobonis of the world. Let's see what these guys that we have are. Now, going back to Cody Bellinger, you can build around him. I agree. If they feel like they can sign him, I don't think it would be a terrible deal to have a Cody Bellinger hitting in the middle of your lineup for a long time. And the other thing I really like about him is his defense. So I'm not disagreeing. I mean, you hate to give him up, and then all of a sudden, he goes somewhere else and just continues to play the way that he did in the past.
What would Marcus Stroman return you? Really good pitcher for a lot of years, has had, I don't want to say a career renaissance because he's been pretty consistent throughout his entire baseball career, but I'd say this is his best year he's had in at least 3-4 seasons there. Has an option at the end of this year, but you would have to imagine with the season that he's had, he's testing the open market. So he's essentially a rental. What can Marcus Stroman get you in return? Tampa Bay Rays are a team that's linked to him. I'm looking at a couple of their prospects right now that I'm sure you've seen when they played for the Montgomery Biscuits. I'll get into them in just a second, but first, your overall thoughts on Marcus Stroman. Is he more valuable right now than Cody Bellinger, considering what's on the block pitching-wise?
If you trade Marcus Stroman, and I think that's going to happen too, you got to get top-end pitching prospects in return. And the Cubs were able to do that last year. When they went out and got Ben Brown, Ben Brown is a top-end pitching prospect. He's a strikeout guy. He's had a lot of success. He's eventually going to get to the big leagues. And they made a few of those trades at the deadline last year, and they paid off. You look at what's available in the market right now, at least with a week to go. And Verlander, older pitcher, has had, success in the postseason. There's a chance that he goes. Giolito, the White Sox have had just a dreadful season. And, I mean, we should talk about that, but
we'll get into it.
Yeah, surprisingly, the Sox have been terrible. And I'm guessing that, Giolito would be somebody else either. So I would say that Stroman, right there in the mix of the best available pitching, except if Ohtani were to go on the market. And you throw that Ohtani in there, and that changes the entire trade landscape, right? Because a team's going to have to throw their entire system at the Angels to get him. So with that in mind, right, I'm just going to assume that the Angels keep Ohtani and that Stroman is in the mix as one of the starters. And when I put him in the list of Verlander and Giolito and maybe Bieber could be one of those guys.
Bieber has control, which is why he'll be sought after if the Guardians do decide to cut loose. Eduardo Rodriguez of the Tigers is a good one. James Paxton's dealing right now. 2 Cardinals and Flaherty and Montgomery could be on the block.
Flaherty would be good. Yeah, but look, I say this year Stroman's been as good as anyone. I mean, he it just gets a lot of outs, and he's a competitor, and so I think he could get a team's going to have to give up a really good pitching prospect. You talk about Tampa Bay, they've just gotten surpassed by Baltimore. I'm sure they'd love to have that veteran with a little bit of fire. What about Toronto, right? They could use him right now, and that's where he was before, like he criticized the front office. You think that everyone could patch that up for a trade? Hey, I think it could happen, but I think that the Cubs are in a really good spot to add a starting pitcher to their system. And the biggest criticism that I have of the Cubs and their development, and this goes back since Theo took over, is that they're so worried about players getting hurt that the pitch counts and the inning counts are just way, way too low for my liking. I want to see pitchers go out, learn how to pitch the third time through the lineup in the minor leagues. I want them to work out of jams. I want them to throw 100 pitches. I don't think that you throw them into the big leagues and go, oh, yeah, by the way, that 80 that you were throwing in AA and AAA, up here we do 100. I think you let that happen. You see it with the Braves and what they've been able to do, one of the best organizations and the best organization in baseball, and one of the best organizations at baseball as far as developing starting pitching. So for the Cubs, it almost benefits them to go trade for starting pitching, or someone else has developed it and maybe they just punch it into the big leagues.
For those of you that don't know, Mick Gillespie's probably called about 17,000 innings of AA baseball, I'd say. I don't know if you have the Larry Ward, countdown clock on how many games you've done, but one of the things you have called is the Tampa Bay Rays minor league affiliate AA Montgomery Biscuits. So you've seen a lot of these players, and now that the Rays are directly in talks per MLB trade rumors with the Cubs and Marcus Stroman, I'm looking at their fourth and fifth top prospects. Kyle Manzardo, first baseman, Mason Montgomery, left-handed pitcher. Two ingredients that if you throw into the Cubs pot, it would help next year, and two guys that are supposed to be big league ready by next year at the latest. Thoughts on those two?
Yeah, look, I didn't see the first baseman, but I saw Mason Montgomery, and he's really good. He can mix his pitches up. He throws a lot of strikes. And again, Tampa Bay is one of these organizations that they don't baby their starting pitching. I mean, they let these guys go out there and develop. And I always thought it was funny that Mason Montgomery pitches for the Montgomery Biscuits. So his, first name.
How many times did you weave that into the broadcast?
I loved it. I said,
what do you say, everybody? Mason Montgomery on the mound in Montgomery.
It's the little things that make me happy, Chuck. I mean, come on, with Montgomery pitching for Montgomery, and you would have figured that would have happened before, but he's the only guy that can ever say that in their organization's history. But, yeah, look, Tampa Bay's got the type of prospects that you want.
Buy, sell, hold. It's the easiest question of the day. Are the Chicago Cubs they have 7 games coming up before the deadline. 2 against the White Sox, 4 against the St. Louis Cardinals, who they just took 3 in a row against, the Cubs did, and then 1 against the Cincinnati Reds. And at that point, you have to make a decision. The clock strikes 12. Does the slipper still fit? What are you going with if you're Chicago? Is there a formula here? If you're 5-2, let it ride with Bellinger, trade Stroman. Are you trading them both regardless? If you're, 2-5, are you also unleashing Kyle Hendricks and Tyone? What are you doing here if I'm giving you the tag of GM for the next few weeks?
Well, I mean, this is the hardest thing for me because, obviously we've talked about it before. I've been a Cubs fan my entire life, and I would love the Cubs to be a team that was ready to buy at this point, and that I felt like could really compete. The Cardinals have been terrible this year, and they beat up on them. I think they'll do the same thing to the White Sox, but I just don't think that that buying right now is the smart move. I think that selling right now and building to the future and coming to spring training next year with this wave of talent that is on the way, and that's to me what I would do. Coming in third place or, losing in the first round of the playoffs is to me a waste of a season when you can go out, make trades, and get your team better. And I've said it before, the baseball needs to change the way that the entire system's set up because you're rewarded for losing, and that's just the way it is.
You're
right?
rewarded for losing if you have good scouting. Because obviously I used to work for the Cincinnati Reds, and they had a boatload of guys in Jay Bruce, Todd Frazier, Aroldis Chapman, Johnny Cueto that they dished out all at the same time. And their scouting was so bad at the time that they got a bunch of guys that turned into John Lambs and Brandon Finnegans and whoever the hell else they returned. So
I'm not familiar with, with all of their trades, but, I can tell you this, that the Cubs have made some good trades that I think that are going to eventually pay off. We talked about them earlier. So if you can continue that and you get top-end prospects, I mean, maybe you're going to hit on one or two of those guys and they'll change your franchise. But I just don't look at this team and think that this is the kind of club that could win the World Series. And if that's not the case, then to me, you gotta sell this year at the deadline.
All right, you see the banner, Mick. South Side struggles. The Chicago White Sox. I think it was about midway through the pandemic, 2021. Maybe it was the COVID season. I looked at the roster this team had with all the young players, and Luis Robert on the rise, and Eloy Jimenez was having a great year, and the pitching, Cease was starting to turn it up a notch. I said the Chicago White Sox are going to be good, and they're going to be good for a very long time. 2 years later, they stink. What happened with this team?
I don't know. I'm listening to one of my favorite radio shows in Chicago, and one of the hosts said that Luis Robert was going to be the next Willie Mays, and I'm like, oh, hold on now. I know Willie Mays here, I just feel like it's an organization that has drafted poorly, that there's not a lot of accountability at the top, and you just got people that have been there for a long time, and they've been allowed to, not have a lot of success. And the minor league team stinks. They don't have any talent. The big league team kind of bought all in. They had Tony La Russa as a manager, 10 years after he was any good at it. He's fallen asleep in the dugout. You missed your window there. And then I look at this team now, and I mean, on paper, like if you're playing Xbox or PlayStation and you have the White Sox on your video game console, you're supposed to be winning, right? I mean, this is supposed to be a good team. They stink. Like, they're so bad. They're almost 20 games under 500. They're about to sell. And I just, look, like I said before, you're better off being bad in baseball than good, but this feels like a ship that the motor's broken, this is just floating out in sea. So I'm curious to see exactly two different seas, by the way, just the direction that this franchise goes. And I think the Cubs are probably going to whoop up on them pretty good here the next couple of days.
I'm thinking so too. Let's go a strong 30 minutes. I'm giving you a little hot take with the last 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the show. I was talking about this with a buddy the other day, Shohei Ohtani, and what he brings to the table. And my friend Dan Devone, a longtime sportscaster in Seattle, said, Shohei Ohtani, this guy is the best to ever do it. Ever do it. He said, we love the reverence, and we hate the fact that we can point to someone in this current age and say he's the best to ever do it. But no one has ever been better that laced up the cleats and dug his spikes into the dirt. And some are saying he's the Japanese Babe Ruth. When you compare him to Babe Ruth, thoughts there?
Well, I mean, first off, I can't stand the people that say, well, Babe Ruth would, he played back when it was softball and all of that stuff. Look, Babe Ruth played in the era that he played in, right? So he was marginally better than every other player, like marginally better, like this. So if Babe Ruth was alive now, I think he would have made the adjustments and he would be a great player.
He would have hit the weight room. He would have stopped smoking cigs and eating pancakes in the dugout.
It would have been a little harder for him, but look, he was by far the best player. Ohtani is the best player now, but he's not marginally better than everybody else. I mean, he's really good, but Mike Trout's really good too. And you have other players that aren't so far off. I mean, look, the fact that he can pitch and hit.
Can I ask you this?
What is he? He's not the best of all time, though.
What's he more special at, hitting or pitching?
I think it's hitting. I mean, to me, he's like a number 3 guy in your rotation pitching, maybe a number 2. Hitting, I mean, he's like like a number
He may hit
Your
60.
best hitter. Yeah,
He may be going for Maris
he
or
is
Judge,
awesome,
I guess.
though. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I don't think he's awesome. Like, he is awesome. Like, and it's cool that, like, they said that the Japanese Babe Ruth was coming, and the Japanese Babe Ruth did get here. Like, he's really the Japanese Babe Ruth, which is pretty cool. So I like that part of it. But, like I said before, is he better than Babe Ruth? Babe Ruth, we're still talking about Babe Ruth, and he died in like the 40s, right? Or like the early 50s or whatever it was, right? We're going to talk about Ohtani and 100 years from now. I don't know, but we're going to talk about Babe Ruth. Like, Babe Ruth is the best. Willie Mays is the second best player, and then I think, like,
what about Barry Bonds?
No.
Take away the asterisks, because obviously everyone knows what he did. Right. But if you're talking production alone, was there a more dominant player than Barry Bonds?
Look, I went out to San Francisco the year that Barry Bonds was signed by the
like
Pirates.
Like a 1,400 OPS every year.
I know, but you know what? He was like a bag of bones. Like, he was just a little skinny kid that had warning track power. Once he put the steroids on, the warning track power became. It obviously became home runs. Was he a great player? Yes. But there's an integrity issue to me that matters. Like in football, like, we don't really care about the stats that much. I mean, who's like the all-time leading rusher and all that stuff. But in baseball, we do. I mean, that's why we talk about Babe Ruth. The fact that he hit 60 home runs and other teams hit like 3. Like, it's just crazy the difference that he made compared to the rest of the field, right? I think Barry Bonds was a great player, and I wish that he wouldn't have done steroids. And I think Barry Bonds without steroids would have hit around 400 home runs.
Okay, there's your hot take to end the show. Mick, good stuff on this Monday. We got Sam behind the scenes producing the entire thing. And remember, like, subscribe, toss it a comment on how stupid Mick is for saying that Barry Bonds isn't in the top 10, whatever it may be. Join the community.
He wasn't in the top 10. I just said he's not on the Mount Rushmore.
We'll have a top 10 show soon. We'll have a MySpace top 10, and we'll go through our top 10 and just a lot of fun content coming on the show, whether it's just little segments, full podcasts, breaking news. Tim Wilkin, the Scout Podcast. I know you wanted to pop on your buddy Jody Davis. We're going to have some guests. Just a good time to be had here on the Cubs Baseball Channel. Forget the lack of subscribers. We're just getting started, baby. Party's just getting started down here in Studio 8. Mick's going to be all over the country. We're going to have a good time.
Yeah, look, it's been a lot of fun, guys. And don't forget to like and subscribe.